This is CNA 938, where you don't miss a thing.
This is Stanley Leong and welcome to Money Mind on CNA 938. These are disruptive times for businesses and business leaders, shaking organizations really to the core and forcing them to reassess leadership in disruptive times. That, by the way, is the title of a book my guest on Money Mind had written and released in 2020. And then last month, Professor Sattar Bawany released the second edition of that book titled Leadership in Disruptive Times. There's a little bit longer title there. Negotiating the New Balance. Now, on Money Mind, we want to spend time getting to know the current climate. What's causing so much disruption to business and leadership, and how to best prepare in managing them? Professor Sattar Bawany is a C-suite master executive coach and CEO of Disruptive Leadership Institute, as well as the Center for Executive Education. Dr. Bawany, welcome back to CNA 98. Good to speak with you again.
Thank you so much, Stanley. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
Trust you have been well since the last time we spoke about the first edition of Leadership in Disruptive Times. Now, from as early as 2019, even before the pandemic, you have acknowledged that these are disruptive times. In fact, we had you on our show twice before in 2020 to discuss the two books you had written about disruptions that are buffeting businesses and inevitably, of course, the leaders of those businesses. What are your more recent observations about the disruption that you are seeing?
Well, I think you're right. The 2020 book, which I will elaborate a little bit later, is about managing the disruption caused by the pandemic, confounded by, and also it's being impacted as well due to the technological revolution, the Industry 4.0. So since then, we have seen many organizations, especially SMEs, are struggling to be able to reinvent, to restructure organization in the post-pandemic. So, and rightly so, because we can see more disruption. And in a survey that we did, global survey, in first half of last year, we asked 529 CEOs and C-suite leaders globally in North America, Middle East, Africa, Europe, and the question, and of course Asia Pacific. And the question was, what do you see are the possible disruption in the coming years, and how are you managing them? So we are seeing 6 mega trends of disruption that are going to happen. One is, of course, climate change. We hear this, everyday news, in documentary, and the other, of course, is the current what's going on, the geopolitical tension, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The U.S., China, the South China Sea conflict, then of course the New World Order, globalization, business nationalism, and then of course the demographic shift. That's another disruption. You can see baby boomer retiring in a big droves, and then you have the Gen Y taking leadership. There's a leadership deficit there, and then your Gen Z coming in with a different expectation, and of course the interesting thing is the impact of the disruptive, innovative technology, such as the ChatGPT, or what you call generative AI, artificial intelligence, which is impacting almost all industry. And of course, metaverse, AR, VR, ER, and the other Web 3.0. And my book covers all that. And lastly, Stanley, don't be too complacent thinking that the pandemic is over, COVID-19. The WHO Director General issued a warning a week ago that we do not know how the COVID-19 is going to evolve, and we are seeing the emergence of new variant, and there's impact. Even Singapore is not spared. We've seen about last month where there's a spike in number of cases because of the variant. And more important, we need to be prepared for more pandemic, because there will be other, for example, H5N1, the bird flu. And there are reports in other parts of the world, and even in US, during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, US suffered tremendously. And we have in Vietnam, China, and others. So we need to be wary. So these are some of the 6 mega trends of disruption that we are seeing, the powerful global forces that are coming together. They're going to impact how we live, how we work. And by the way, it's going to impact all countries, all sector industry, all company organization, and most importantly, going to impact workers, individuals. So we need to be prepared. And how do we learn to cope with this? And leaders' role is very important to navigate these challenges.
Yeah, looks like corporate leaders have their work cut out. In fact, it's going to be more complex. I mentioned earlier on how this is a VUCA world, but I think it's increasingly more and more VUCA to some degree, if you can put it on the continuum there. But let's talk about also your previous book. In 2020, it was titled Leadership in Disruptive Times. Now your latest title is Leadership in Disruptive Times with an addition, Negotiating the New Balance. So what's fundamentally different about what you are presenting to readers now in this second edition, and would say emerging from the pandemic, finding that new footing after we've come out of it, although we're not really out of the woods in some sense, be the main difference?
Yeah, of course. I think I mentioned briefly that the 2020 book came out in July 2020 in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you know, the Wuhan lockdown was in February, March 2020, and my editor in New York told me that, look, you need to focus. And initially the book was looking at the impact. The 2020 book was looking at the impact of the fourth industrial revolution, or Industry 4.0, on business, and the need to optimize and leverage on digital technology to bring about the organization to greater heights. And the book also talked about how to leverage on proven tools and framework, best practice approaches to help organizations to transform the digital transformation journey, and include case study like DBS Bank, case study like Grab. We have case study Microsoft, Google, Netflix, and many other companies. And then, in the midst of writing that book in 2019, 2020, early 2020, then the pandemic impacted. So I devote half of the book, about 4 chapters, on COVID-19. And a lot of things that I've written then is proven to be true. And the COVID-19 is truly a black swan event, and it is truly also a VUCA. It's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and up to today is still ambiguous. We do not know where does the virus come from, whether in the lab or is it from the market in Wuhan. Still not known. There are different hypotheses. So that was the 2020 book, helping leaders to optimize, to leverage on digital transformation. How can be a disruptive digital leader? Yeah, so it's more about digital transformation. The 2023 book, which came out last month, focuses on the future disruption. So we have seen leaders fail miserably, both political, business, social, NGOs, all type of organizations. Many of them fail to be able to maneuver the disruptive challenges. And because a lot of things are unknown, is VUCA. So what happened is, we want to be prepared. So I was talking to a lot of clients, CEOs worldwide, and what would be of interest to them is to be ready for the next disruption. And interestingly, when the survey I mentioned earlier, the 529 CEO and C-suite leader globally, we asked those questions. They came up with, out of 10 global disruptive forces, they mentioned 6, with the top 6 which I mentioned earlier. Yeah, and climate change being on top, and then of course the geopolitical tension, and of course the concern about demographic shift, yeah, diversity. Of course, the ESG, environmental, social, and governance. These are really important for businesses and leaders to understand. So the 2023 book focuses on how you need to ensure the right leadership is present to be able to thrive in an era of constantly disruptive business environment, which will lead to crisis. So it's about crisis management, about disruptive management, and how do you put in place a strategy which will allow the organization to be able to sustain. So it's about balancing. The title is Leadership Disruptive, Negotiating the New Balance. And why we talk about negotiating the new balance, that what are the factors the organization need to take into consideration to balance the need between enterprise risk management and to ensure sustainability, and also looking at how do you put the external and internal stakeholders. So, and the internal stakeholders is very important. And then the book also talked at length, how do you prepare your organization to be agile, adaptive, innovation-driven in an era of constant disruption and crisis. So it's about crisis management. Half of the book talk about preparing for future crisis. And there will be.
Right.
There
Yeah,
will be.
for sure. It's not the be-all and end-all with COVID-19. I'm sure there are a lot more lined up as well. But interesting you talk about agility because even in your midst of writing the book back in 2020, you had to quickly, pivot. Again, I like to use that cliched word, pivot, because you suddenly had to dedicate one whole chunk of that book, the first edition, to talking about COVID-19 while it was still unfolding as well. So agility, I think it's very core and critical in leadership, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think agility, adaptability allow leaders to adapt and change quickly and adjust their strategies, their plan as circumstances change, because all these external forces are impacting the organization. So organization and leaders need to remain flexible, and they need to be open to new ideas, approaches on how to respond to this disruption and managing the crisis successfully. So what we call the skill called cognitive readiness is a suite of leadership competency, including critical thinking, emotional, social intelligence, sensing, connecting the dots, problem solving, adaptive agility, and of course the most important, communication. How do you articulate your strategy to your team, to your internal, external stakeholder? So agility, adaptability is indeed one of them. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, resilience. Because what is important, resilience here refers to the ability to bounce back and from setback and remain determined, remain focused instead of the challenges. Because during crisis, you're going to have failure. How do you engage the team? How do you bring people? How do you allow experimentation? Failure will happen. And you must be prepared to allow people to learn from it. So you need to be a learning organization, Stanley. So this is something which organizations need to be aware of, be fully aware of. Yeah.
Don't waste a learning opportunity like failure, which presents itself. Professor Sattar Bawany is my guest on Money Mind right now. He is a C-suite master executive coach and also CEO of Disruptive Leadership Institute and Center for Executive Education. We are also turning the pages of Leadership in Disruptive Times, Negotiating the New Balance. This is the second edition of that book that was first written in 2020. So it's got the 2023 updates here. It's a refreshed version that we are trying to understand more of what's been put into that book. So, all right, so leadership definitely isn't a walk in the park. I think we all know that. And I liken it to almost like, this whole series of hurricanes or cyclones that are lined up outside over sea, and they're going to be, heading our way, leaving a trail of devastation in its path. Talking about that, I mean, we recently had Hurricane Mocha that went through Myanmar and Bangladesh, and then now we're talking about Guam also being hit by cyclones. So would you say that that's a good way of looking at disruptions to business, disruptions to leadership, that all these are going to be coming our way? How then do we prepare ourselves for landfall?
Yeah, exactly. I think the climate change definitely is a good example to talk about disruption, especially social disruption, because the climate change is real. It's not fake, as what Donald Trump alluded to, and many people talk about climate. Is it really true? The fact that the COP, the last COP meeting in Egypt is very clear. Organizations are yet to fulfill their obligations to meet the target, and in terms of CO2 reduction and so forth. But severe weather can have a very impact on the social disruption in the sense that you can see there could be injuries, for the severe weather, right? And then you have even mental health impact, people are struggling. Then you have the air pollution, like in certain countries, in China, India, because that can create asthma, cardiovascular disease. And then you have, of course, you have water quality, water supply, which could come up with, can impact certain countries where you can have even cholera, you have harmful algae bloom, and lastly, environmental degradation, where you talk about forced migration because of forestation and so forth. So there are many, and of course, you're talking about climate change is only one. Okay, this you talk about hurricane, heat wave, drought, fire, rise in temperature, extreme weather. This is only one, and this we are experiencing now. We are flooding places where we never imagined. Australia, in the US,
Italy,
in Africa.
yeah,
Exactly. Italy, in Australia, it's becoming so frequent. But Stanley, we talk about there's only one part of the the climate change, but there are others. The technological disruption that is happening right now. You look at ChatGPT, the generative AI. Many people are struggling, even educational institutions. Students are finding it easy to provide answers. And it's a challenge. As an adjunct professor in various universities, we are grappling with this impact. How do we look at metaverse in retail, in tourism? How do you look at AI, AR, augmented reality, VR, virtual reality, and the mixed reality? And how do you get all this together? And lastly, of course, Web 3.0 leveraging on blockchain technology. And blockchain technology is superb. Unfortunately, it's underutilized. And the sad thing is that people associate blockchain with cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is only one application of blockchain, but there are other in supply chain, in healthcare, in financial, huge application. So all this is going to disrupt. And are we ready for it?
Professor Bawany, I will disrupt you for a little bit because we've got to go for the news. But when we come back, we're going to be talking about those critical skills that are needed for leaders in these disruptive times. Stay with us. Professor Sattar Bawany is a C-suite Master Executive Coach and CEO of Disruptive Leadership Institute and the Center for Executive Education.